You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
The United Nations General Assembly votes overwhelmingly in favor of observer statehood status for the Palestinian Authority. The State of Israel declares its intention to build new settlements on controversial West Bank lands that have thus far been left unsettled. And a major New York synagogue publicly celebrates the UN vote as a move that brings a needed sense of dignity and purpose to the Palestinian people, only to issue an apology just 2 days later. How serious a blow to the State of Israel is the UN vote? Did Israel make a mistake with its new settlement announcement? And is there anything wrong with synagogues and American Jewish organizations publicly supporting the UN vote for Palestinian observer state status? These are the questions we'll be discussing with our panel that includes Micah Halpern, Middle East expert, syndicated columnist, and author of Thugs on History's Most Notorious Despots. Jonathan Mark, associate editor of the Jewish Week, the most widely read Jewish newspaper in the greater New York metropolitan area. Gilbert Kahn, professor of political science at Kean University, and Michael Prell, a conservative political strategist and author of Under Dogma, all on this week's Roundtable. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me and for joining our audience to talk about issues that are being talked about everywhere I go right now. And Micah, I want to begin with you. Let's take the first question. How serious a blow is it to the State of Israel that the UN voted this, upgraded the status of Palestinian, not formal statehood, but observer statehood status at the UN?
I think the whole concept of what transpired in the United Nations is important to discuss and evaluate in proper context. There is no question at all that diplomatically, the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians is about as far as it's been and tense as it's been in a very, very long time. That said, there were some serious challenges. First, almost nothing changed practically because of what happened, except tensions emerged even more between them. However, there is no question in my mind that Israel suffered a tremendous diplomatic blow. 8 other countries joined them. 8. Now, if I mention some of these countries, it's unbelievable. So the United States is one, Canada is another. The only European country was Czechia. The only other country outside of the Pacific Islands was Panama. And then you've got Nauru, which has 9,738 people in it. The Marshall Islands, 110,000 people in it. You've got Palau with 11,000 people. I mean, you've got, almost a block of Manhattan is voting here. Even in the Zionism is Racism resolution, which was in the end rescinded, even there you had 34 major countries that rejected it. Here, Israel suffered a terrible diplomatic blow because they couldn't convince people of it. They couldn't convince them. And what I would have done in the aftermath, I would certainly ask the representatives of those countries that have relations with Israel to actually listen to Abbas's speech and then explain why they voted, because that speech is a blood libel. I don't think there's any question about it.
Jonathan, how damaging is the UN vote?
I think it's damaging. Not Zionism is racism, but I think the state of Israel and the international community was a disaster going into the vote. So really, it didn't really change anything. It just sort of affirmed what we already knew.
What's the worst thing that can happen because of that vote?
I'm not really sure anything worse could happen. I mean, that wasn't already happening. The peace process is dead. This spits in the face of the peace process. It also shows that it shows a contempt for the peace process, not just a real contempt.
Because
What it is that you have all these countries, and even some of the countries that voted for Israel here, choosing to be the negotiating advocate for the Palestinians. As opposed to promoting negotiations, they are becoming the negotiator. And that's a very, very bad development.
Michael, how damaging?
It's bad, and I think it's more than just a diplomatic loss. I think this is a serious loss. I think we're past diplomacy at this point. Certainly the Palestinians are past diplomacy. Just off the top, I want to say I'm very proud that I worked for Prime Minister Stephen Harper and their Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird to help get them elected. And they've done great things, Canada. Strong leaders, but right now I think this is beyond diplomacy. I think this is more than diplomacy. I think it's conflict. I mean, let's look at what's been said since then. You know, Zahar said, let's join hands and carry the rifle together, you know, the PA and them. They said Jerusalem is the eternal capital. This is more than just a diplomatic defeat. This could be war.
Gil, is it damaging?
It's damaging, but there's a much bigger context of how to look at this. I think first there's the question of the context of the PA deciding to bring this back after last year's decision not to proceed with the vote. That was a different kind of vote, it was a different situation. But I think one has to understand the internal dynamics which are going on in the Palestinian world, even before the Gaza confrontation with Israel. The tension between Hamas and the PA, and the feeling among Abbas and his folk that they had to do something to rally public support for them. It's not suggesting that this is a wonderful thing. It's a horrific thing for Israel to have to bear that kind of public humiliation, as it seems. So you see Israel, 8 countries supporting it. It's ugly. But there's a context in which all of this happens. And I think one of the points that Micah mentioned earlier is important, that it doesn't change very much. It potentially could give them the capacity to bring Israel up in charge of the International Criminal Court. I mean, it gives them some entree to other places. But I think, but it has a sense of putting Israel again, a nation that stands by itself and alone.
Okay. American Jews, and really Americans in general, are watching this discussion right now. And there are people who are asking themselves, a lot was made of this. I want to understand why. For anybody who's watching and does not understand why we should care that this vote took place. And you know, when we watched the vote on, and Shalom TV covered the vote live on Shalom TV, and there was a moment when the electronic screen flashed up the number 138 to 9, 41 abstentions. It's interesting. There's some Jews who want to say 50 nations didn't go along with it. Only 9 voted with Israel, and they were
8 voted with Israel and Israel.
Yes, that's correct. And they were most of them were very small outside the U.S. and Canada. But we're watching, and then the next thing you're watching is people, just ordinary people, as far as the camera's concerned, hugging in the Palestinian delegation. And it was reminiscent of the pictures I've seen of the same date, 65 years earlier, at Lake Success, when the UN voted for the partition plan. And Jews hugged each other. Moshe Sherrod got up and hugged somebody, and Abba Eban's there, he's hugging somebody. And if I didn't know anything else, it looked like a moment where the United Nations and the world community was saying to the Palestinian people, you also have a right to be. So I want somebody here to explain to any well-meaning individual, what's the real big deal here? I'm hearing 4 guys say in general, and basically nothing changes on the ground. So why is it such a big deal?
This was an attempt by the Palestinians to rectify history. It could not have happened on Wednesday, November 26th. It could not have happened on Friday, November 28th. It had to happen on the 29th of November.
The anniversary.
The anniversary of 1947.
Of the partition plan.
It had to happen then because it was a sense of a need to change history. What's interesting is they didn't declare history. They didn't talk about how their leadership had failed in 1947. They didn't speak about that. And they didn't really emphasize dramatically the elements of the significance of the date. But for those who knew, knew that it could not happen at any other time, which is why the United States was actually trying to push it off. Because if they pushed it off a little bit, it would have to wait to the General Assembly again next year. They couldn't just bring it up, in January, because then it has no resonance. What they did is they created a historical moment out of a lost historical moment. And that was their objective. That was their purpose.
And boy, I'm not arguing this. I'm just asking for the viewer. So what?
Oh, the significance.
What's the so what?
The significance is that it gave them international acclamation and put Israel in a corner with 8 other countries, 4 of which are almost irrelevant. And those are the people that actually signed. And when you take a look at that panorama of the world right now, you sort of see that the United States, Canada, Czechia, Panama, and Israel are sort of stuck over here, and Iran and the Palestinians and many of the other countries are on the other side. And that's where the tension exists.
But that would be true, whether this vote took place or not.
Well, what should concern maybe the American watching is how America has proven to be diplomatically pathetic in terms of protecting Israel, protecting their own interests. And we just finished a campaign where we kept being told that Obama's such a great guy, he has your back, all these positive things about the relationship. Here comes the vote, a test vote, and American diplomacy came up short. Not just short, but bankrupt. And that should give a lot of worry to people concerned about the United States and the world. Israel is being part of that.
You feel in some way, John, this was a American failure as well?
100%.
Anybody else feel that way?
I do as well.
Yeah, sure.
And just to get back to your first point, why is this such a big deal? The reason is because in the court of public opinion, not in the minutiae of what this vote actually meant, I'm with you. It doesn't fundamentally change what's happening at the United Nations, but it absolutely changes what's happening in the world. People were cheering in the streets. The low-information American voters walking by their newspapers or television screens are going to see the birth of a new nation. Upon that new nation, which was built the other day, according to most people, they're going to start doing things. Sorry, they've already started to do things. They're going to vow to use the United Nations to stop Israeli settlements. That's what the Palestinians are going to do. Then the United Nations, newly empowered, just days after the vote, turned around and said, Israel, now you should open up your nuclear sites for inspection. It is going to be game on for the world against Israel, against this nation, quote, that has been built last week on this vote. That's what most people think. And the future of Israel and the future of this situation likely won't be entirely decided by the people there. What the American people think matters. And if a whole bunch of Americans think it's now a Palestinian state, which they do, that's a problem.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, to me, and I'm trying to, as I said earlier, trying to put this into some historical as well as immediate understanding. I am much more, and I know we'll get to it in a bit, but I'm much more concerned about the fact that there will be a UN Security Council resolution criticizing Israel's decision on settlements. And that will probably not get a U.S. veto. And that concerns me. And it won't get a U.S. veto unless the Palestinians push the character of that resolution to the point that the U.S. has to veto it. And that's the consequence of not the vote itself at the UN, but Israel's response to the vote at the UN.
All of you seem to be saying that this revealed the extent of Israel's isolation, political isolation. It was a visible, you almost touch it, the extent to which now Israel, except for the United States and Canada, is isolated in the world. It doesn't mean it happened on that Thursday, but it does mean it became evident in a different, more powerful way, more palpable way. That, in essence, that's what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, and more so, even people who are considered friends of Israel were not comfortable voting with Israel on this. So Germany was the classic example, where Germany described face-to-face with the Prime Minister of Israel how, on the one hand, they reject the concept of unilateral actions. And this is unilateral action. For those that don't understand, the concept is that the declaration of the State of Palestine in the United Nations was done without negotiations. And as a result, the unilateral act is the antithesis of what Germany believes in. They said that. But because of the rights of the Palestinian people, they could not vote against it, so they had to abstain. And indeed, I would argue that it is the role now of the Foreign Ministry of Israel to go to every one of those friends and ask for an explanation. And especially in light, I'm going to repeat this again, especially in light of what was said from the dais of the United Nations by Abbas.
Let's talk about
And
that for one
it's
moment.
really important.
Let's talk about that. Because when I heard him speak, I thought he had a chance to be an incredible statesman that day, to get up and say something very conciliatory. We are looking for a right of Palestinian statehood, but we want to live in peace with the state of Israel, side by side with the Jewish state of Israel. And had he said anything of that nature, it would have changed the entire character of the day.
No question. I've been lambasting Susan Rice for a long time now because of the Benghazi thing. But she's the only person in the United Nations that called to task Abbas and said, wrong. You're speaking about war. All of your words are about hatred, and you're trying to mask that in the concept of peace by presenting this resolution. Everything we hear from you is about hatred. And it's an interesting kind of thing. And that was exactly it was just one lie, mishistory, and misrepresentation after the other. And I think that truly, even the liberal Western European nations, when hearing that, need to respond, because though they might not be pro-Israel, they're not anti-Semitic. Does that make sense? I mean, there's a big difference. They're pro-Palestinian because of an oppression. They feel oppressed, that the Palestinians are oppressed and Israel is oppressing them. But they do not justify anti-Semitism. This was when I say blood libel, this was an anti-Semitic rant.
How did the Jewish Week handle it?
Well, I think the way we've mishandled it didn't begin this week, and I'll tell you exactly why. With no, I love the Jewish Week, but I'm not speaking for the Jewish Week
Yes,
either.
that's right.
Is that, well, two things. Well, first of all, just one statement
Sure, go
first.
ahead.
That I think what we're seeing is a move from wanting peace to wanting Israel's surrender. It's a huge difference. That once in the Oslo years there was a desire for peace, now there's a desire, even on the Jewish left, for surrender. And in terms of American freefall, you saw the recent poll how the Democrats are only supporting Israel even on the Gaza war, which is a black and white situation. 40% of Democrats supported Israel, which is a pathetically low figure. Okay, and it really goes to a lot of issues. But how we've mishandled it in the media, and I'm speaking for the media in general now, all of whom I speak of.
For them, you could speak
with the
of
same,
it.
with the
The
same
Jewish
lack
Week, you
of
can't
credibility
speak
that I speak for my own paper, is that we've ignored the rockets for the past 5 years, 10 years. Absolutely ignored the rockets. It hasn't been a front page story in any Jewish newspaper. And this was a cause for war, and it hasn't been a front page story in any Jewish newspaper. It was settlements are a story. You can't keep the Jewish left from not bringing up settlements every 4 minutes. And they've never brought up, like Michael Lerner's Tikkun, enough is enough about the rockets, about the war, but not a word of enough is enough about the rockets. I haven't heard that from anybody. And secondarily, on the incitement thing from Abbas, that's also new. But if you would be reading a Jewish newspaper, you would not know that there's been a level of Der Stürmer-like incitement and nastiness and Nazi-like ugliness focused on the Israel, which I do think is anti-Semitic, beyond even anti-Zionist. Not covered, not mentioned. Almost no Jewish papers dealing with this whatsoever on a steady basis. And therefore, all they've been told is that settlements are the only issue. But every single paper. And I think that's been a disaster.
Can I just add, you see, what concerns me is I agree with you that the kind of rhetoric and the kind of anger that he spewed out was unacceptable. I also know that he's got a political future that probably is, I don't know, maybe 6 months. I'm not sure. I don't know. I know that he knows that both the Palestinian Authority is under tremendous pressure to try to either move towards Hamas or accept Hamas's direction or even be overthrown by Hamas functionally within the West Bank. So he has tremendous internal problems. Fayyad is ready to walk away. He's just had it. He tried his best to try to put the economic house in order, and I think he's done it. And now he's just, I can't politically get ahead. So the consequences in the region are such that he is fighting for political existence. I don't justify anything that he said. I find it repugnant. But the fact is, that's the only way at the moment he can try to push himself forward. Now, the fact that the world doesn't call him on it, that's not acceptable either. The fact that people don't speak out, that's not acceptable. But he is coming from the place where he knows he has virtually no future. And if he's going to try to rebuild or hold on to something, he has to move that way. And I think that's a problem.
I want to come back to you, Jonathan, for one moment. I want to ask you a direct question. Can you help for our audience? How do you place yourself in the Jewish community? Where would you put yourself? Are you center right, center left, left, right, what?
I used to think of myself as liberal left.
I did too.
I did too. But yet, you know something, when you see what's happening to your two favorite countries, you know, there's a point where even you have to wake up and see the roses, you know. I mean, lahavdil, it's like even Charles Lindbergh offered himself to Roosevelt, what could I do to help you after 1941? So there comes a point where you see what's happening, and you have to say, really, am I concerned with like issues here and there, or do I see the bigger picture of the possible death of Israel?
And Gil, where do you place yourself?
Left of center, certainly.
Okay, and I expected, therefore, and it's unfair of anybody to expect anything from anybody, but I expected you to be, I don't know how to say, happier about what happened in the United Nations because you are known to be on the left. You don't seem happy at all. And you know there are people on the left in the Jewish community, and again we're going to get to that in a moment, a little later on, who really came out and celebrated.
My concern was that at the end of the day, the politics and the diplomacy failed. And that's what troubles me as a political scientist. I look at these things and I say, you know, this didn't have to go this way. That's what upsets me. Now, the fact that the Palestinians were given a sense of themselves, one cannot make an argument. You know, you could have done it differently. It could have worked out differently. It did not. We could have moved on if there had been less hostility.
At the moment, I assume you do support the two-state solution.
Absolutely.
Okay. Did this vote help or hurt the process by which Israel and the Palestinians can negotiate a two-state solution?
What about if I would say the following, that if you put this vote and the next issue which we're going to talk about, they both were, from my perspective, equally dangerous to the second state solution, to the two-state solution.
Okay. Explain to our audience, how does this vote get in the way of moving forward with the two-state solution?
Because I think that the Israeli public, and certainly coming into an election now, will get its back up and be very, very hostile to any further negotiations or movement to negotiations, which in turn could trigger a Palestinian response that says, oh, go ahead, have one state.
Will this hurt the two-state solution process?
Well, it can't get any worse off than what it is right now.
Then it doesn't. What you mean? No, it doesn't hurt. Then
It doesn't hurt because the two-state solution is almost dead. Despite the fact that I will say I advocate the two-state solution. I think it's the best solution for all parties. But because there is absolutely no negotiation and no party to talk to, Israel has no one to talk to, and this proves it. It proves that they don't want the Palestinians don't want negotiations.
How does it prove it?
Because they went away from. You see, this was the interesting dilemma in the diplomatic failure of the United States. They could have pushed Palestinians to the Israelis instead of pushing the Israelis to the Palestinians. And what happened was, instead, they tried to focus dramatically different on the United Nations resolution. The reality is that the only way to move towards this two-state solution is to get the Palestinians and the Israelis together again to discuss things. And the only way you can do that is through action. And action means not just compromises, it means bringing them together, even to talk about the weather at first, anything. And right now we have nothing. So this act, as a unilateral action, just flies in the face of not just Israel, the United States, and everything else.
Okay, and if somebody were to say to you, okay, the UN just gave more status to the Palestinian people. It didn't create a real state. Still, the state of Israel and the Palestinians have to sit down and work out How do they create a two-state solution where they practically live together?
The Palestinians
Why
always-
does this vote get in the way of anything?
Here's what happened. The Palestinians are always saying it's emotional. It's emotional. The settlements aren't practical. It's an emotional thing. You can't have them because emotionally it rips at the very heartland of our society. The point is to create a state, to announce a state the way they did, without even the acceptance of, by the way, without the sponsorship of the United States, which was the entire process of the Oslo Accords, that the United States was sponsoring, they were the sponsors of that relationship. It was literally flying in the face of the principles of the peace process. Simple as that. I'm not even talking about the protocols of the United Nations, where it's against the protocols of the United Nations do not allow a state to exist without borders. It can't happen. It's the principle of the establishment of the United Nations. And so what you have is a terrible step back in terms of this the nature of the diplomatic process. And it's a slap in the face to Israel, and a slap in the face of the United States, and a slap in the face of any kind of negotiated settlement. Better to disagree in negotiations than to create unilateral decisions. You make unilateral decisions against Hamas. You don't do it against
What was the
Israel.
decision? What was the decision that was made? It's still, I mean, Abbas has said we want a two-state solution. He doesn't ever call it a Jewish state, but he said it. Most American Jews say Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. Fatah does. The PA is our best chance to ever have a solution right now. We should grab it while the grabbing is still possible. If we don't grab it, there's going to be a one-state solution. But every Jew I talk to who talks about the two-state solution says the Palestinian Authority is the group that Israel can negotiate with, as opposed to Hamas.
But if I may-
So what? So the United Nations said something nice to them. What does it, and I'm not arguing this, I want it clarified. What's the real problem here? Why can't the boss say tomorrow, Mr. Netanyahu, you're invited to Ramallah? But Netanyahu says he'll go anytime, any place, without preconditions. What if a boss were to say, now that we have been given a certain kind of emotional recognition, Mr. Netanyahu, I invite you to Ramallah on Thursday. Come. What does the vote do to make that less possible or probable? Anybody?
Well, two things. First of all, the idea that most American Jews think that about the Palestinian Authority speaks to the media's malpractice of not covering the Palestinian Authority.
And you're in the media.
Yeah, exactly
You're-
right. Well, I feel
okay.
I feel responsible. I feel terrible about it.
You don't believe there is anybody right now, even Fatah,
Right.
for Israel to negotiate with?
No, I don't. And I think the idea of this obsession with a two-state solution at some point is unfortunate, because let's say in 1863, you wouldn't want a two-state solution. You know, in 1942, you didn't want a two-state solution between Germany and everybody else. You know, so at a certain point, you have to resolve the basic issue of who you're dealing with before you want this two-state solution. This obsession, I don't understand.
And if I can agree with my friend from the left who's come over to my side, thank you so much. And I've seen this happen often. This is how, the way you do this, the way you get people to move their beliefs from left to right, and in Canada we did it from 60% left Jewish votes to 60% right. And the way you shake people up is with big issues like this. The future of Israel's at stake, and that's what's shaking you awake right now. Two-state solution? Well, Bibi had a quote this week, the Palestinians want a state without peace. And I would say the Palestinians want a state without Israel. Right? We're beyond diplomacy here. This is not about diplomacy. This is about the future of Israel. And I'm done appealing to people's better natures in the media and diplomacy because they don't have better natures. So the way you get people to change their behavior is you punish them. You make it so painful for them to continue to do what they're doing that they must change. And I've done this everywhere. So right now, let me ask you a question. What are the consequences for what a boss said? Nothing. What are the consequences for firing rockets from residential areas, which is a war crime, into Israeli residential areas, which is a war crime? What are the consequences? There are no consequences. I'm tired of diplomacy. I'm tired of appealing to people's better natures. So I'm actually about to launch an effort to bring it to the enemy, and I'm going to call them the enemy. I'm going to show the world exactly who these people are. Because right now, the media is not doing it. Our diplomats aren't doing it. No one has the courage. So on television, I'm going to start putting on television exactly what these people do, and most people might be seeing this for the first time.
I want to move it now to issue number 2. I don't know if I'm the only one who experienced this. I'll tell you what I experienced. I'd love to hear what the 4 of you have to say. It's the weekend after the vote. I'm at a bat mitzvah. I'm sitting at a table at the reception, And all the Jews at the table only want to discuss one thing, not the vote. They want to discuss the Israeli declaration that they're going to build in a section, nobody even knows where it is, E1, and we're going to show it on a map. It happens to be basically between Ma'ale Adumim, an outlying suburban city. It's a small city outside of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem itself. And the way it is portrayed in the media is that if, in fact, Israel does go ahead and build on E1, it will create a barrier that will separate Bethlehem and Ramallah from East Jerusalem, thereby making the intended Palestinian state an impossibility with East Jerusalem as its capital. In addition, Israel is now going to build in a suburb of East Jerusalem 3,000 new housing settlements. All everybody wants to talk about is, why did Israel have to do something that looks spiteful and childish, as if Israel wants to punish the Palestinian people for having the temerity to go to the United Nations on their behalf and try to seek what they thought was a nice thing for them, some kind of statehood recognition, even though it's not formal UN statehood. But that's all people wanted to discuss. And all of a sudden, the emphasis was no longer on the vote, but on this Israel action. When you heard this statement coming out of Israel, Jonathan, what was your reaction?
I was delighted because it showed a sign of life. You know, it was like in The Grapes of Wrath, where Pa Jode is drawing in the sand and they're thrilled that he's thinking and caring. It showed me that Israel has some life in it. When they came out with the Levy report a couple of months ago and Israel ignored it, that showed no life, that Israel had a claim to the West Bank. All Israel's claims have never been substantiated by Israel. Israel has acted like a thief in the night on the West Bank.
Okay, I won't tell you what I said at the table, but let's say you're at the table.
Right, I would say.
What do you say now to this well-meaning Jew? But they consider themselves to be liberal Jews.
Right.
They're in favor of the two-state solution, and this will do nothing to help now. All it will do will be push the Palestinians further from the table. That's what they kept saying. You would say?
I would say this is already a fait accompli by what has already happened. With the Palestinians dismissing all negotiation as an option for either side, then Israel's going to act without negotiation. They want to act unilaterally. Israel acts unilaterally. This is what happens. You have to be, and this is showing some sign of strength, of defiance, of you don't like it, this is what's going to happen. You want to keep doing things on your own? Maybe we'll build the settlement from the north to the south. And then there'll be facts on the ground, and then you want to negotiate? It doesn't preclude peace, because Israel could evacuate everything like they did Yamit and Gaza. But in the absence of that, if this is where we're going to go, then build and build and build, and if you don't like it, then don't do unilateral actions on your own.
But are even you surprised as a one-time leftist that you're saying this?
No, I'm not.
All right. Not. What would you say? You're at the table.
I would say, firstly, I would acknowledge that it is childish. I think it's important to recognize it.
It was childish for Israel to do this.
Absolutely.
I think
so
it
too?
clearly
100%.
is a tit for tat. Now, that said, that does not mean it's not Israel's right to do it.
Right. Was Israel wrong to do it?
Correct.
No, actually, in your column today, you said that it was spitting in the face of America. That is a bit harsh, don't you think? I call it building homes, not spitting in the face of...
Well, I think Mr. Harper said it very well today also.
I think that it's tit for tat. And Israel has the right to build there. Not only do they have the right to build it, the plans are not from here. They were from all the way back.
Right.
It doesn't matter. They announced it now, and
that way
it
it's
was
childish.
a reprisal.
And here's the interesting thing. But it wasn't against the Palestinians, because Israel, by and large, is not playing a game with the Palestinians. They don't. They're too minor an operator in the whole thing. They're too minor an operator. I know that sounds strange, but that's the case. They're playing a game with the United States. With the United States. The United States was against this E1 thing from the beginning. It was the United States that they were spiting on this also. And that's why I said spitting in the face of the United States. And the government of Israel right now thinks that what the Palestinians did was childish also in the United Nations, and they couldn't stop it. And so they're not interested in what the Palestinians do until the Palestinians actually come to the table at this point. They do not consider themselves partners with the Palestinians because they're not equals. And that upsets the Palestinians a lot.
Most American Jews don't understand anything the way you've described it.
I'm sorry, but I'm always right.
No, yes, and I'm not saying you're wrong at all. I'm making a point to the four of you that one of the interesting things this discussion might do is frame the issue in a way that normally it's never discussed in the American Jewish community.
I hope
Am I
so.
right? You want to
Yeah,
come
no,
and say
I-
that?
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
the beauty of this past week on both the UN and with E1 is that it illuminates the situation more than destroys it. It illuminates it.
Yes.
And illumination is a beautiful thing because it brings everything to the reality of what we're all about and who's who and whose side is on what and what's going on here. Instead of this nonsense.
Actually, the
of
intellectual term is enlightenment.
enlightenment.
But wait a minute, what good do we feel when so-called European friends recall their ambassadors, call in Israeli ambassadors, raise their higher level of diplomatic angst with Israel, when the U.S. government right now has a lot more on its plate in the region than it possibly can imagine, and this is just in the way. They're dealing with Egypt, with Syria, and with a lot of other messes. And the fact was that even Canada, who voted with Israel now, is saying, what are you doing with settlements? Why do this now?
Are you critical that Israel
Yes,
came out with this
absolutely. I think I agree with Micah's comment precisely. I think he's right on.
That?
That this is a slap at the U.S., slap at any friendships that they wanted to build. I am very worried. I'm much more worried. I'm not interested in bravado. I'm interested in whether it's constructive, and I think it's not. You can argue, do what you want. We're going to do what you want, what we want. You can make that argument.
It's the definition of constructive. It's construction. It's people building homes, right? And let there be light. I'm with you completely. My first reaction was, heck yeah, except I didn't say heck. And I bought a plane ticket for Israel. I'm going to set up a pup tent there. Like, this is a big show of strength. This shows us after Bibi pulled back and agreed to the ceasefire, and we all thought, oh, there it goes again. A show of strength, right? And what's he showing strength over? He's not showing strength over, I want to go and slap babies and kill people. I want to build homes for my people on my land. And that's going to show
By the
the
way,
world.
You mean I'm the only one here who hears what Jews are saying all over America? And it goes like this. Do you want to make peace with the Palestinians? If you do, you don't throw it in their face. If you do, you don't take an area which everyone has agreed we're going to leave this area alone. Most people believe it's going to end up in the new Jewish state anyway. I'm almost done. Most people believe it's going to end up in the Jewish state anyway. But there has been a conscious decision not to do this because it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Why was that necessary? People, Jews, who believe their belief still they believe there's a possibility of a two-state solution because what they see as the alternative is just disaster, and therefore they want the two-state solution. And they say, why do you do anything that would make it more difficult for the two-state solution to be implemented? Why do you do anything that makes the Palestinian feel, oh, you see, Israel isn't really serious?
It's a red herring. The reason why it's a red herring is suddenly we're hearing again that this little area was the obstacle to peace. And I've got to tell you something. In looking at the negotiations throughout the years, this little piece of area was a major element in negotiations under the Olmert leadership and under Barak's leadership. Actually, so much so, the Taba negotiations spoke about E1. They talked about negotiating for E1, dealing with that as a settlement block, as an area which would link it to Jerusalem. It's right there in the negotiations. Those negotiations fell through. It was very clear that that was going to be an extension.
I understand your point.
My point is that people are saying suddenly, oh, this little area is the obstacle to peace. But it'll never happen. Peace can't happen because Israel decided to plan or further their planning in this particular area of Ma'ale
Will
Adumim.
it separate East Jerusalem from Ramallah and Bethlehem?
No, actually, this is what it does. It connects Ma'ale Adumim to Jerusalem itself. A part of the plan is also, and it goes right by Abu Dis, which is very interesting, which is where the Palestinian parliament is actually situated. You can actually see it. It's the old road from Jericho to Jerusalem. That's the way it went, right through there.
So
and if you remember,
no,
by the way,
wait,
that was the
so
days
Are
when
you saying it should have been a ho-hum?
Yeah.
Israel says, we're going to build an E1, and the world, the Jewish world and the Palestinian world says, oh, who cares?
No, I'm saying that the key word here is settlement. It's not where it is. Anytime the word settlement gets out, Everyone goes
Fine.
into an uproar.
Why did
And it doesn't
Israel
matter,
have
they
to
could have
come
been
out
settlers on the
now
moon.
and say
That's exactly the issue.
we'll build this out?
That's
Why did they have to do it? That's
Why-
what I'm
I'm
hearing
saying that the
everywhere.
land is
That's
irrelevant.
what I'm hearing everywhere.
I think the issue is that my concern is Israel's safety and security. And I don't think Israel's safety and security in any way needs settlement expansion at this point or a further hostility created towards anyone. It needs to secure the friendships that it can still muster and secure those friendships as best it can. And all they do by continually or repeatedly throwing this out is undermine that. But the point about the E1, which should be clarified, is that it eliminates contiguity of the territories that are left, and that's
The end around that is the plan, actually, in Taba,
Yeah,
was to
I
actually
understand
have a
that,
route
but
from Ramallah to Bethlehem.
But that
and
wasn't.
right there.
That's
And
not
all
on the
part-
table.
That's
The
all
problem
part of
was
the
they
discussion of E1.
wanted to have.
to create the contiguity.
Yeah, but the other piece is not in that discussion at the moment, and that was the problem. That's why do it? I mean, I think we agree. I mean, why do it now?
Are you
I
saying why do it now? Are you saying why do it now?
Yeah, I think that the decision to do it was, I know why they did it now. They did it in order to be spiteful to the United States, and they did it in order to say, look, we're strong enough to do it, no one's going to stop
Why
us
did
from
they
doing
want
it.
to spite the
And by way,
United States when the United
you should
States
know, there's no,
sided with them in this
no
vote?
land has been changed.
Why did they want to spite the U.S.?
They wanted to spite the United States because they know where the United States stands on the question of the Palestinian statehood, despite the fact that the United States voted with Israel in the United Nations. They know that pressure is being brought to create something that can't be created without negotiations. And that's why they're saying it to the United States. Look, we are ultimately the masters of our destiny, Israel is saying. They're saying it very clearly. We do it. You could disagree with it. You could say no, but they are saying we're the masters of our destiny, not the United Nations, not the United States, and not anyone else.
I agree
and
with
we'll
you
take
on
the
that.
flak.
I agree with you on that.
Right,
I agree with
and
you on
the-
this. We're trying to say, does this anger our friends? How many friends does Israel have at this point? And at what point do you say, at what point do you say, okay, we're on our own, it's our land, let's build? I think it was critically important to show some strength after what happened over the past week and a half to 2 weeks and say, no, this is our land, we're going to build here, period, end of sentence. And let the chips fall where they may. We know exactly, I agree with you,
But where
that
those
America
chips
could
fall
have
may
done
be
so much
disastrous.
more. But at this point, what are you going to do? Appeal to the better nature of people who want you dead? It's
We
not
don't.
gonna
We don't
happen.
need it now. Israel does not need to make those moves now. That doesn't. It's not incumbent upon its safety and security to make those kinds of moves at this time.
Except Israel's made conciliatory moves. In the last 4 years, they've had the settlement freeze. They've done one thing
Correct.
after another
Correct.
under this guise called gestures.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
They've gotten Israel into this hole deeper, deeper, deeper. So,
Well, I don't see the hole. I mean,
well, clearly we're in a terrible hole. We're all discussing the hole for the past 20 minutes, right? So the fact is, Israel's gotten into this hole, and in terms of spiting the United States, the first thing Obama did was his signature policy was to delegitimize Israel vis-a-vis the settlements. So Israel has a right, and should have 4 years ago even, build settlements. They should have built an E1 4 years ago.
They're not building, though, by the way.
No, but
They
they
just
should
announced
have.
it.
But
They
they
should
should
have.
have.
That was the funny
The only
thing
thing
about it.
that takes me back with what you said is that you're doing something that I think most American Jews do. You're speaking for American Jews. You start talking about waving a red flag in front of the bull. You start the story with the red flag. The truth is the bull has already gored us.
Yes.
You know, and so what difference does it make?
And Jonathan, you're correct. This illuminated the situation. The situation
Right.
is Israel's on its own.
It's clearly on its own, and America can't be. So I mean, there is some support from the United States, but it's not total support. It's not Roosevelt and Churchill here. This is bare bones support, as skeletal support as you expect. But what's interesting here, and I just want to bring this back. I don't know if you've seen the CNN poll about 2 weeks ago about the Gaza war, and there was an accompanying poll about Israel in general. If you track Israeli poll and polling in America about Israel, the more conciliatory Israel is in a liberal J Street kind of way, the worse Israel's polling goes in the United States, contrary to all the imagined. So under Oslo, Israel was around 38% sympathetic, right? Under Shamir, it was in 64%. Israel hasn't hit the 60s from Shamir in a quarter of a century till now. So clearly the American public knows what's going on
And
here.
can I give you a poll to go with that? There was
Yeah.
another poll that showed that Barack Obama was less popular among the Arab nations while he was bowing down to them than George Bush was when he was bombing.
Right.
People respect strength. So when Bibi showed life, like you said, and showed strength, that made me feel great. When you show strength, people will come towards you. When you constantly back down and try to convince the world to love us when they hate us, where's that gotten us?
And even in terms of the media, back to that for one second, now you're seeing articles on rockets, and now you're seeing articles on incitement.
It's too late.
Well, it's not too late, because we're in the middle of the war. The war's still going.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to make it clear. Have you, at the table that I was at,
Yeah.
I was the lone voice. What I
Right.
wanted to hear what you would have said, and I do want to respect the fact that there are many American Jews who I believe don't get it. And one of the things I want to do in an intelligent way is give people a chance to both agree and disagree. But I would like some enlightenment here, and my job is, to the extent to which I can, make sure I have expressed the arguments, which give you a chance to respond in any way you wish to.
Yeah, I think that the critique is important, and I think we have to focus on what they're saying. And I think it has to fit into a context of critique. And it's a problem within the Jewish community. I appreciate critique and contrary opinion on this issue. What I don't appreciate is that as an excuse for Israel's actions and to make Israel into an enemy, an ogre, or a country that should not exist. And what happens is that I often see this, not just in the Jewish community, across the board in these conversations, where Israel is again creating a situation whereby they're acting and taking themselves out of the family of the nation, so to speak. And these kinds of acts, and arguments become arguments of anti-Semitism again. And I, by the way, don't differentiate between the anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist issue here. That was an old Arafat line he used to say all the time, how could I be an anti-Semite? I'm a Semite myself.
Silly.
And it was ridiculous, ridiculous ideas. But you understand my point.
Yes.
Criticism of Israel out of love is
Very
absolutely-
different.
It's very
Very
different.
different.
And you sense the difference, by the way, in the argument. The argument gets pitched higher and higher and higher. And as your argument points, like Israel's right to do things, you could disagree with it. And as it gets higher and higher, and suddenly they start slapping, not physically, they start slapping words which are very, very ugly.
Yes.
And that becomes what I consider beyond the pale. And I see it in the Jewish community and the non-Jewish
I am
community.
so
and that's-
glad you said it, and I have said now a number of times what really worries me is, for the first time, I'm hearing American Jews suggesting on the fringes,
Yeah.
the state of Israel was really created as a mistake. It just wasn't the right thing to do. I understand that it happened after the Holocaust, but really, Israel was created on the backs of people's land, and it was really an international error that would never be repeated if it had to be done today.
But I think it's
it's very
interesting to remember
important to articulate
that most American Jews were not into Zionism before there was a state.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
They weren't into Zionism until '67 already happened.
Correct.
Most of them are basically, if I may say so, ignorant about the
Yes.
issues and historically.
Yes.
And so at a certain point, what does it mean? And also, these same American Jews, Peter Beinart is you could say that I'm for boycotting Israel. I'm boycotting other Jews and be welcome in 2/3 of the American Jewish community and almost 100% of the non-Orthodox community. And if that's not fighting words to warrant these people's dismissal of their opinion, if they believe in a boycott, then I don't know what further you can go.
So B'nai Jeshurun is a major synagogue here in Manhattan. It is known to be exciting. It's innovative. It is not affiliated with any movement now. It used to be in the conservative movement. I've gone there with my wife, and the Friday night service is full of young people and older people, and they dance and they walk in the dance in the aisle and they sing, and I have enormous regard for their rabbis there. And Roli is terrific. But then B'nai Jeshurun comes out and says the following: the vote at the UN yesterday is a great moment for us as citizens of the world. And they went on to praise the vote. They believe it in some way helps the recognition of the Palestinian people. I want to say this also publicly to our audience. I immediately called B'nai Jeshurun and invited anyone on their staff to come on Shalom TV and discuss what prompted them to do this. They would not give me one person, and they weren't nice about it. And it's been said it was sort of a courageous thing to do. It's not courageous. if you then want to come on, if you will not then come on and discuss this in the media. And I want to again say I have enormous regard for the institution and for their rabbis. Their cantor is out of this world. At the same time, it is unacceptable for an organization to publish something like this and not be willing to talk to the Jewish Week, Shalom TV, or the New York Times. Having said that, to what degree do you believe synagogues, rabbis, Jewish institutions have a right to go public in a way that flies against the understood will of A, the State of Israel, and B, organizational Jewish life? Your magazine, your newspaper, Jewish Week, has to deal with this all the time. Where do you stand on the extent to which Jews go public with criticism of the State of Israel?
Well, I think it's interesting that there's nothing easier in the Jewish community than being critical of the State of Israel, and nothing's more difficult than being in the media and answering those people back. There's not a voice to answer those people back.
Very fair job.
There's just a voice to criticize.
Right.
So under the guise of like we're the beleaguered, critics, the truth is they are almost bullyish in terms of blocking all alternative opinion, defending the State of Israel.
Yes.
And that's a terrible development.
Incidentally, the left is suddenly very willing to deny the right of the right to speak.
Exactly right.
Which just, I grew up on this notion that everybody had a right to speak, and that the Jew was one of the real defenders of free speech. And if somebody on the left was not allowed to speak, I was infuriated. I'm as infuriated if somebody says to somebody on the right. And I've been told, on Shalom TV, you shouldn't have certain people on because they're too far on the right. How do you do that?
Right.
How do you do it? What's your sense?
I believe that Jewish organizations can say and do what they want based on their board and leadership that they choose. It doesn't reflect me. Now, I'm also free to criticize that, which is what I do on a regular basis. What they did, I think, was improper. I thought it was impolitic. I thought it was wrong. I thought it showed their mettle. And indeed, your comments about them being scared, afraid to come, makes them even more typical in terms of that. To have a critique means that you articulate it clearly, you stand up, you recognize it, and when I'm wrong, you say I'm wrong. But you're able to actually articulate. To hide after you make a comment is bullyish.
Yes, and we should
I think it's a bully.
Just to complete the story, obviously there were people at B'nai Jeshurun who were very upset by this, and an apology has been issued by the rabbis who said that in essence this was sent out prematurely. I don't know how that
That's
can
not a
happen.
retraction, by the way.
No, that's also.
But they did apologize.
No, but that's not a retraction.
They apologized for saying that the board of directors, the executive director, and the individual in charge of the Israel division of B'nai Jeshurun, those names were added to this, and the rabbis are saying, no, it was only us, and it was an incomplete document. It came out too early.
But what makes that hollow is that this kind of talk has been going on at BJ for years and years and years on Shabbos morning. And there's a lot of shuls where they think, the rabbi thinks he can make his own personal bully pulpit, what the shul is about. Not davening, not spirituality, not learning, but his own political belief, and imposing that on the congregation in ways that the supposedly right wing never imposes. You don't see the Satmar Rebbe getting up and talking politics every Shabbos, every single Shabbos and Friday night. And so this has been going on forever, till the point where it's natural that the rabbis can feel arrogant enough to do this and maybe hit a wall of where they want
But
to
given that Satmar is anti-Israel, so you don't have to say
Wait a minute.
By the way,
There's an issue here. If you're going to talk about politics, are we talking only about using the pulpit to get involved in Israeli politics? Or are we talking about it getting in politics? And that's a much more complicated discussion. And in that case, rabbis of all stripes get involved, I think, much more than they ought to. I think, in other words, that they can do so as individuals, but using their pulpits and using their congregations as instruments, whether it's everything, and it's true, it's not only of Jews, it's of all denominations.
I'm asking you a general question. To what extent do Jews in positions of leadership have the right or the responsibility either to speak out when they think Israel is doing something wrong, or do they have a responsibility to keep it inside the family, not go public with it? What is your advice?
I think it's to establish a specific general principle is very difficult. I mean, there are a lot of times in which Jews should bite hard and not say anything.
What do you think?
There's politics and then there's politics. Do you want to talk about infighting among political parties in Israel? No, but should you talk about the future viability of the state of Israel? I think that supersedes politics, and I think that's something that is a survival discussion. And I think we also witnessed what you're talking about, which is consequences. They would have got away with it unless my inbox exploded and your inbox exploded. They felt the consequences, and then they changed their behavior.
The leaders in BJ.
The leaders of BJ, they changed.
And if I may defend my friends in Satmar for a second. Satmar, one guy in Satmar told me that they were anti-Zionist before anti-Zionism was cool. Right?
They were anti-Zionist before there was Zionism.
But you answer the question too. Where is the responsibility among Jewish leaders? Is it to speak out, or is there a responsibility not to speak out? Not to be critical of Israel. The argument is that when you are critical of Israel, you're lending comfort, aid, and support to those who are really part of the BDS movement, who really want to see an end to the state of Israel.
I think it has no business on, at least during the Shabbos services, and no business Friday night, and it's only has any legitimacy now if they open it up to the other side as well, which they don't do. If the shul is really a place where the Jewish community can come together and talk things out, like they on this station or in a good newspaper, God bless them. But when the shul becomes an authoritarian situation where only one side, usually the left, controls the conversation, then it becomes impossible.
Well,
and the same way in Teaneck, where one rabbi is trying to control it from the right.
Right.
It's just wrong.
You wrap it up for us.
I think that it becomes a problem because fundamentally the support of Israel should be in all synagogues and all temples, because that should be a universal Jewish idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
The problem is, and this is where it becomes a problem, there are people who actually suggest it's not. And those people are sometimes running synagogues and temples. That's a problem. So our problem is actually in education. I cannot accept the principle that the non-support of Israel is not a general idea within the Jewish community.
Okay, I want
and
you
if
to
it isn't, then we have to really work on
And
it.
I subscribe to his position. Not on everything, but on that.
But to be fair, the people who are most troubled, it seems to me, are those who really believe very much in the existence of the state of Israel and believe that Israel is engaged in policies which are counterproductive and self-destructive.
Then it's a tonal question. The
question.
Tone is really important in critique. And it's something in terms of love and relationship. And we do it all the time in education. We do it with ourselves. We do it with our colleagues and our friends. We do it with our spouses. We engage in constant discussion, dialogue, and critique. And what we do is the tone is dramatically different. We know the difference in tone. We know when we critique out of love and when we critique because we're being spiteful and arrogant and obnoxious. And it's that obnoxiousness that I want to strip away from the synagogue in general with regard to its relationship to Israel. It has to be positive. Not just everything about Israel. One can critique, but out of love. Once that happens, I think we'll have turned a huge corner in terms of the Jewish community.
The tone here was out of this world. I thank you so much, all four of you. Micah, Michael, Gil, Jonathan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
4 people giving you some insight. And look, all we can do is raise issues, and you have to also decide, where do you stand? But you know, I would love to hear from you. And if you send me your emails, we'll read them on the air. So please be in touch with me this week. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. My thanks to Micah Halpern, Jonathan Mark, Gilbert Kahn, Michael Prell for being part of this roundtable. And as always, I thank you for being part of the Shalom TV community. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.